Hi everyone. Welcome to week 11 of the study skills class for this year. This is April 23rd. We had this semester, we started off by doing a learning style assessment for each one of you. And I think most of you from that have a little bit of an idea what your primary learning style might be. And so we talked about that. We moved from there. We talked about presentation styles, the different styles that teachers and instructors use, and how to evaluate that, and how to figure out what's important to a teacher or an instructor by assessing their presentation styles. Because once we figure out their presentation style, we can it's much easier to figure out what's important to them, what we're going to see on tests, what we need to remember, because it's what's important to them is important to us. And presentation style is how we figure out how to read a teacher. Then we talked about note taking. We went into note taking. We talked about developing the skills of abbreviated writing and telegraph writing so that you can get more information down in smaller spaces, more information and less writing, to get information into your notes. And then we talked about the Cornell note-taking system, which is especially valuable and especially helpful in test preparation. And so then we talked about test preparation itself. We talked about how to think about getting ready for a large exam, a major exam, how to prepare for it, how to organize your week in order to divide and conquer so that you aren't cramming all night the night before a test, and so you're alert and rested for the test, and also just how to organize to prepare for a test. Today, by the way, if you haven't already printed out your class note sheet for today, you want to poke the pause button and go ahead and print that out, as well as the homework for next week. You want to go ahead and do that. So today what we're going to do is take a few minutes to talk about strategies used to attack and win when you're presented with different kinds or different types of test questions. This is just about just how to figure out and do your best with different kinds of test questions. You're going to encounter a lot of different kinds or types of questions as you roll through life on tests and quizzes and exams. There's test questions like fill in the blank, true or false, multiple choice, matching, short answer or short essays, and short and long answer essays, questions. When I was a college freshman, one of my first teachers was Dr. Frida Gillette, and this was I'm going to share my experience with my first college exam. Dr. Frida Gillette, she taught a course called History of Civilization in one of the first classes I took there, and Dr. Gillette had to be in her mid-90s. At least that's what she seemed to me. She was 90 pounds of scowling fury, even at her advanced years. And so the first test of my college life was handed out by Dr. Gillette. I went against all advice, and I stayed up until 4 o'clock in the morning cramming for Dr. Frida's test. The morning of the test, I was anxious, I was over coffeed or over caffeined. Went into the room, Dr. Gillette or the teacher's aides handed out the test, and I dove right in. I was as prepared as I could possibly get. I thought, I just need to get this over with and do my best. I dove right in. I frantically answered questions trying to get through this thing. I knew the test was timed, and I was a little afraid, I might not have enough time, so I just wrote frantically. There was a lot of short answer essay questions in this test. So eventually the time was called, and I handed in my test. I didn't feel too bad about it. But the next class, 2 days later, they handed back the tests, and I was horrified at my grade. I just was mortified. I couldn't imagine how I'd gotten this low grade. There was red marks all over the place, which I didn't know what they meant. I didn't even know how what she was trying to grade, and so I didn't exactly know what to do, and so I asked Dr. Gillette afterwards. I took my test up to her, and I laid it there on the podium and asked her, Dr. Gillette, I'm not sure I understand how I got this grade. It just seems so low, and she didn't. If I remember, she didn't say anything. She just took her long, bony finger and put it on the test right where the directions are, right at the top of the test, right after name. She put her finger right where the directions are, right where it said, all answers must be written in complete sentences. And I stood there looking at that, and I tried my best to see if I could get some mercy here. And so I said, Dr. Gillette, I am so sorry. I just sort of missed that part of the directions. I gave her my sad puppy eyes, trying to get some mercy or grace here. Her answer was, I'm also sorry you missed that part of the directions, and removed her bony finger and walked away. One of my first big lessons in test taking. So anyway, what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about different types of questions and how to work with them and how to answer them when they come on test. The first one we're going to look at this is under strategies for test questions on your test sheet there. The first one we're going to look at is our multiple choice questions. Multiple choice questions are very common and very popular for teachers. It's a good, relatively easy way to get a lot of information down in a test form. Here's how you do it. What you want to do is when you see a multiple choice question, multiple choice, is basically a sentence or a phrase that often has a blank in it, and then the answers that you would use to fill in the possible answers that you would use to fill in the blank are below that, A, B, C, D, or something like that. Some form of that is what we call multiple choice questions. Very common. You're going to see and get a lot of those as you roll through life. First thing you want to do when you come upon a section of multiple choice, as you might have guessed already, I'm going to suggest that you read the directions carefully. directions. Multiple choice directions can say, put the letter of the correct answer in the space, or they might say put the letter of the correct answer in front of the number of the question. I mean, you got to read it carefully. Make sure that you follow the directions for this particular multiple choice section. The second thing you want to do is you want to read the stem, what they call the stem. The stem is a sentence. So let's say you read the directions and then you see number 1, and there's a sentence with a blank in it. That's what we call the stem. The second thing you want to do to attack this particular type of question is you want to read the stem twice. Read the stem twice. Break it down into parts. What the stem says is important. The exact wording of the stem is important. Multiple choice can be really tricky if you don't read it carefully, because a lot of times it's a little bit purposefully sometimes tricky to get you to go real too fast to one bait answer down there that's wrong, but it seems right because you haven't looked at it haven't looked at the stem sentence carefully. So you want to read the stem twice. You want to break it down into parts. The next thing you want to do is you want to read the choices carefully. Back up is break it down into parts is BREAK it down, DOWN. Break it down into parts. Read it in sections, whatever it takes so that you really know what that stem says. Then you want to read the choices, CHOICES. You want to read the choices carefully. Again, they can be tricky. and what might seem like a silly answer might be the right one. So you want to read them carefully and think about them before you make your choice. The next thing you want to do in a multiple choice question is eliminate all the clearly incorrect options. You know, teachers run out of possibilities. Sometimes there just isn't four logical sort of almost maybe answers to this question. So they'll put something that's clearly not even related to the question in there. So you want to eliminate that. Cross it out if you can, because that eliminates it, narrows the field down to, say, 3 more. So you want to eliminate all the clearly incorrect answers. And then the next section here is you want to watch for qualifiers. 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 Remember, qualifiers or absolutes. Qualifiers are words that either qualify or make something an absolute. Qualifiers like always, never, all, none, sometimes. These are what we call absolutes. That always, sometimes, never, always. Always, sometimes, never, all, none. Those, not sometimes. Let me just see what I got here. Oh yes, watch out for absolutes. Sometimes, usually, most, some, few, and often. Or absolutes like always, never, all, or none. This will change how you think about the answer. If in the STEM you see qualifiers, especially absolutes, always, never, all. You know, like all birds fly. If you read it too quick, you might write down there, this is true or something like that. So you want to make sure that you make sure the absolutes and the qualifiers, that you're really aware of what's in the STEM up there. And then it says you want to watch out for all of the above or none of the above answers. If these are only used occasionally, so you see the STEM sentence up here, number 21, there's a sentence, then there's 3 answers, and maybe the last one often will say all of the above or none of the above. Generally, unless there's a whole lot of those in a test, generally you should consider they might be true. It's just the way teachers write tests, and they're tempted to put all the right answers in there and then ask you to choose that all of them are right, or all the wrong answers in there, and ask you to choose the option none of the above. So where it says watch out for all of the above or none of the above, if they're only used occasionally, often that is the correct answer. If you got 2 or 3 left of your choices there, you have absolutely no clue what's the correct answer. Well, then you just have to eliminate what you can and guess. GUESS. Multiple choice questions. Then there's true and false questions. True and false questions. You want to read each question twice. Again, the qualifiers and the absolutes in there. That's where all birds fly. Is quite different than most birds fly, or most birds lay eggs, or all birds lay eggs, or whatever. Anyway, it can often be a determiner whether it's true or false, what the absolute is or what the qualifier is. So number 2, read each question twice, TWICE. The next is watch for qualifiers. Qualifiers, I guess that's what we were talking about here too as well. QUALIFIERS. Generally, absolutes tend to be false. All, never, every, none, always. Those are absolutes. Generally, they tend to be false because they're trying to be tricky. So it's good to remember that, consider that many times the absolute stems, or the questions with absolutes in them, with true and false questions, tend to be false. Generally, the more complex a question is, again, very generally, but generally the more complex a true and false question is, tends to be true. Teachers just can't help but teach. And if they're going to make it a complex sentence, it just tends to be them teaching it over again. It's a review, and they also hesitate to have a long, complex sentence that's false because it's just sometimes too tricky. It's not a fair question. So it's just a thought, but in true and false, generally the more complex they are, the more likely they are to be true. Then matching. Matching, you want to read. This is where you have a list of things on each side. You may have a typical one would be definition, a word over on one side and a definition over on the other, and they want you to match the word and the definition. There's other forms of matching questions, but that's one of the most common. And what you want to do here is, these can be tricky, and it's very important to read the directions carefully. The directions will tell you. It might tell you to draw a line between the definition and the word. Or it might say take the letter in front of the definition and write it in front of the word. I mean, you want to read the directions carefully when you comes to working with matching questions. So you want to read the directions carefully, directions. Then you want to make sure that you read through both sides and then answer the easy ones. Read them all the way, read both sides, both columns, top to bottom. Then go back, and some are very obvious, will be very obvious. So you want to match up the ones that are very easy. And then once you've marked the ones you're sure of, then cross them out. So they're not in your line of sight. They're not in your field of vision to confuse you. So you want to get rid of them to see what's left. And then you want to mark out the used ones and look for clues. Mark out is M-A-R-K-O-U-T. Mark out the used ones and then look for clues. Look for clues that might help you to match up those two sides. And then finally, eliminate all you can until you end up with just two on each side and you have no clue which one goes where. And so the thing to do there is eliminate, E-L-I-M-I-N-A-T-E. Eliminate and guess. So that's it for this week. Next week, we are going to do a full in-class review. Remember, one of the things that I suggested, that before an exam or some kind of exercise, if you can get the teacher to do an in-class review, often the instructor or the teacher will spill a lot of information that helps you do well on the upcoming tests. And that next week, we're going to do that. We're going to do an in-class review of all the main points from our classes from September all the way through to April. And this exercise, this is good preparation for some kind of final exercise that we have planned for the end of class. So don't forget, your homework from last week is due today. So if you haven't sent that in, take a picture of it, or if it's in a Word file or some file, just attach it to an email to me. My email address is on the homework sheet. But don't forget, that's due today, on Thursday, April 23rd. And there is no homework to be turned in for next week. You'll see on your homework sheet there is an assignment, but there's no homework to be turned in next week. You want to look over all your notes for some kind of end of semester exercise or quiz or test that's in the planning stages. So we'll talk more about that next week. So it's been great talking with you. If you have any questions, email me, text me, call me on my cell phone, and have a great week.